Gieditch. Gias mueriditch. Hi, Charja. Falcherot Gogelic and Le. Shanansha. Today, let's go over the traditional Irish greeting, Gieditch, and its customary response, Gias mueriditch. So we'll go over how to pronounce it correctly, what it means, and then we're going to break it down further, how it all gets put together, the grammar behind it, and why it functions the way it does, and if it's even still used nowadays. Let's get started. Here we have the traditional greeting written out. Gieditch, and the response, Gia is mueriditch. The very first word we have here is Gia. 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 Gia means God. Just one God. The second word is ditch. Ditch. That means to you, literally. To you. So altogether, we have Gieditch. God to you. But of course, in English, we would phrase that more as like, God be with you. You respond to it saying, Gia, just like in the first part, Gia is mutter. 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 Ditch. Again, just like in the first part. So what's going on here? God and Mary. That's Mary to you. And this spelling of Mary, M-U-I-R-E, mutter, is almost exclusively used for the Blessed Virgin Mary. You'll recall that Ireland, of course, has had centuries and centuries of very devout Catholic belief. And so the traditional greeting in Ireland was, of course, strongly influenced by that. So you would greet each other with this sort of blessing of wishing God to be with someone, and then the response being that God and Mary would be with them as well. So let's break things down a little bit more, shall we? Let's take this word, ditch. Gia, the first part, is pretty straightforward. It just means God, and always does. This, though, ditch. Ditch. Let's see what's going on here. Now that means to you. To you. Okay? One of the awesome things about Irish is that it has conjugated prepositions. That's right. Prepositions change their form depending on the pronoun that they are referring to. It would be like if in English you say, I give the ball to you, you put the to and the you together in its own separate form. That's what Irish does. So the usual word for like to or giving for, someone is do. Do. So to you, now the word for you, just one you, not y'all, just one you is tu. Tu. Do, tu, for you. But you wouldn't say do tu. That is incorrect. You want to fuse the do with the tu, and it gets its own form. Ditch. Ditch. Ditch is do and tu combined in their own conjugated preposition, becoming ditch. Now let's tackle the response. Gias mueriditch. Gia is mueriditch. The one in the middle is the one that we saw first. Dia is Mutter Ditch. So we have Dia, God, is, and Mutter, Mary, Ditch, to you. God and Mary to you. Or God and Mary be with you, as we would say it in the English. So we have God, we have Mary. We've just learned what ditch means. What about is right here, though? That can be a little complicated if we don't know what's going on. So here's what's functioning there. Is, in this case, is a shortened form of the word for and. The usual word for and in Irish is agus. Agus. This often gets clipped in quick speech, or especially if you're like describing two things that are closely related to each other, like apples and oranges, or to and fro, etc., things like that. And the agus gets clipped to just is, or even shorter. Sometimes you'll see this written this way as well. Gias muere ditch. Gias muere ditch. Especially for those super common phrases, things tend to get shortened up very often. Not unusual there. Now let's go even further. What about that pronunciation there? Why are those letters pronounced the way they are? So one of the cardinal things about the Irish language is that your sounds are grouped into broad and slender. Broad and slender. Lahan agus keel. Lahan is keel. All right? What that means is that pretty much every consonant technically has two sounds to it, depending on the vowels that are around it. The broad vowels would be A, O, U, A-O, A-E. And there's some other things we can get into. That's the gist. The slender vowels, the big ones, are E and I. E and I. Watch out for your E's and I's. Let's just break it down with our example here. Especially because we get treated to the letter D, especially, functioning as slender in one case here, and broad in the other. And its pronunciation is quite different depending on whether it is broad or slender. Now, some other letters, it's really not as noticeable. And especially for a lot of speakers, there won't be much of a difference at all for some letters. But we'll stick to this for now. Letter D in Gia. Gia. So because the letter D is followed by an I right here, the letter I is slender. So that means this D gets its slender tone. It will be pronounced slender. Slender D is pronounced like J. In the Ulster dialect, it's pretty much like the English J sound, as in John. So, this is pronounced Gia. Gia. Is. Now this is pronounced is. That's actually a broad S sound, but it's, again, because this actually is a clipped form of agus. Agus. And that U is broad. So is pronounced with a broad S. A slender S would be sh, a sh sound. Like in the name Sean. That's why the Irish spelling is S-E-A-N. To let us know that that S needs to be pronounced slender. Because it's next to an E. Remember, E and I are our slender vowels. Muerte. Muerte. The M is a broad M. It's right next to the U. Not a huge difference between a slender M all by itself and a broad M, but it does give us that mu sound that we want. Muerte. Muerte. Then we have a slender R, which can be a complicated sound in the dialect that we're using. Slender R is pronounced in the middle or at the end of a word. If a word starts with what should be a slender R, you just can pronounce it the usual Broadway, which is more of a regular rolled or trilled R, like r, roll off the tongue. But the slender R is ez, muere. It's very quick, muere. And we end with ditch. Now note, now we have a broad D. D next to a U. Our main broad vowels are A-O-U, then A-E, A-O. Ditch. So the broad D in Irish is almost exactly like the English D. And I'll tell you what, if you wanted to pronounce it that way, most people probably wouldn't give you trouble. But technically, the Irish D is almost like the English one, but you pronounce it with your tongue coming off of your front teeth. Duh. Okay? You notice in English, at least American English, we actually are tapping just behind the teeth for the letter D sound. In the Irish broad D pronunciation, you want to go off the teeth themselves. Ditch. Now note, ditch ends with that ch sound. I don't see any CHs going on there though, which is how it would be in English. So why is that? Well, I'm glad you asked. The T is right next to that I there. So what does that mean? What kind of sound should it have? Slender. Slender T. Slender T has a ch sound. Ch. So that's why it is ditch. So there you have it. A bit about the traditional greeting in Irish. And note, it is very much traditional. In fact, I've heard it from others, read it elsewhere, etc., that this is generally not used on a daily basis in the Irish-speaking parts of Ireland in the modern day. It is a more formal way of greeting people, but it is rooted so much in the cultural heritage of Ireland that it is worth carrying on and teaching. And I think it's a good introduction as a greeting in Irish, because the alternative usually is just hi, H-A-I-G-H, which is probably used quite a bit more, but that is clearly influenced from English. It's berlachas, as we call it. It's something just stolen right from the English. So it really isn't authentic Irish in itself. And so that is a more authentic Irish greeting, but again, super traditional. Probably not going to hear it a lot in modern context. But I don't think anyone would bat an eye if you wanted to use it on them either. So, after all, you're just wishing for some godly goodwill with one another. So, I hope you enjoyed this short video describing the traditional Irish greeting of Giadich and the response, Gias Muritich. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Please subscribe and like this video, and check out the rest that we have for Irish of the Day. Till next time, this has been Sean. Slán.